Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan. It's not Spawn year. It's day 26 of my comic review video day calendar. And this time I'm going to review a spin off of a major event, major run. This happens quite frequently with these kinds of things where you'll have a character that's introduced. It's kind of a breakout character, is popular or ostensibly one of the things that makes the series really popular, and regardless of whether anybody's got great ideas or anything, that character's got to be spun off into his own book. Sometimes that works out really well, as is apparently the case with this book, because even though my first impression with the first issue is this reads a little obligatory and a little aimless, and like it doesn't totally know what Azrael wants to be as its own thing. It goes on for a shocking number of years, from 1995 all the way to 2003. So Talon, this is not. There's another Batman spin-off sort of character that years later, decades later, that did not catch on and was not a popular book that got canceled very quickly, spinning off from Court of Owls. But anyway, this is Azrael #1, written by Denny O'Neil, who wrote the original Sword of Azrael, and it really feels like going back full circle with that. You'll be kind of at home if you've read Sword of Azrael. There's a lot of similarities here in the writing and characterization, but also in some ways it sort of feels like nothing happened in between because, and I mean, it did, and it will be, I'm sure that you'll see some character progression from Jean-Paul Valley after this when he gets all of his memories back, but we're back to yet another amnesia plot, like with Spawn. But yeah, Jean-Paul Valley is back to being his nerdy, not quite sure of himself kind of guy here, wrestling with his identity, and that's kind of the point of this whole thing. But it feels like we're kind of right back where we were with him in Sword of Azrael, except he is a little bit older now, and he is, been through even more crazy traumatic stuff that's making him question who he really is and whether he has any control over his own destiny. This is drawn not by Joe Quesada, who drew Sword of Azrael, but by the pretty talented Barry Kitson, who I've always liked, and he does this kind of flashy early mid-90s the superhero stuff that I've always kind of appreciated. Right at home here with this stuff. Boy, this first scene is really weird, and I'm excited to show it to you. It's just very strange. But Kitson drew a lot of Batman and Superman kind of after their major events in the early 90s. So I guess he was the go-to guy for after Superman died and after Batman got his back broken, and worked off and on in the industry all the way up until recently. The most recent credit I could find for him, he might be doing some of his own stuff, I'm not sure, but in mainstream stuff anyway, 2017, he did the Wonder Woman Tasmanian Devil crossover, of all things, when DC was crossing its superheroes with Looney Tunes. There's some fun stuff during that, but it was a very strange kind of experiment, and they've actually done it at least twice now. But I digress. So I said when I reviewed Sword of Azrael, which I did when I was trying to get, I've actually reviewed that twice, believe it or not, when I was trying to get Batman Year off the ground, and I never was able to finish that, and I was doing Nightfall in singles, issue to issue, and now I'm reviewing Nightfall in overview reviews, so never fear, I will finally finish that. This year, quick plug, Kareem and Austin and I, that threesome, we're going to get back together again and tackle the Knight's End, or the Knight's Quest, pardon me, section of Nightfall during Bat March, so not too long from now, just about a month and a half, and then we're going to try to tackle Knight's End a little bit later in the year if possible. Next year for sure, but hopefully we can do both of those this year. Anyway, so I said when I reviewed Sword of Azrael that there's some kind of odd writing here and there from Denny O'Neil where it seems like he's being just kind of weird for the sake of being weird. There's that whole chocolate fajita line from Alfred that I couldn't stop laughing at. This opening scene takes that to a whole other level, and it's like 4 or 5 pages of chocolate fajita lines. Let's just read some of this together, shall we? Because it's really weird. Now, keep in mind that this is all going to be. Oh, and there's Joe Quesada's name right there. He gets a co-creator credit for Azrael, as he should. But keep in mind that this whole thing is a hallucination, so it's not gonna be. And I've made this reference before in this series, but it's not gonna be like later Neil Adams Batman, where there's all this weird stuff that feels like it should be a fever dream or some kind of drug trip, and then there's no real explanation for it. It's just as insane and bad stuff crazy as it seems. This will sort of make sense, but it also feels self-indulgent, and it's like, why did O'Neill write it like this, and why did he want to make this as just random as he could? It does kind of grab you right away. You can't stop reading because you're like, why are these characters saying what they're saying? And like, you already see Batman as a big demon, which calls back to the imagery in sort of Azrael. But it opens up and he says, "Give me your shoes." You're like, oh, that's really odd. What is he doing? Was Denny O'Neill on drugs when he wrote this? No, the shoes are not yours. The shoes are mine. You will never get the shoes. And then Demon Batman says, we'll see about that. And it just keeps going. And the strangest stuff is at the bottom of this page, where Demon Batman with this huge broadsword, how is this not an action figure? Pistachio ice cream in the toaster oven. Oh, good. Most excellent good. Like, what? So, this is an excuse for a couple of things. To be weird and shocking and make the reader go, huh, which I'm doing, so good job, Denny O'Neill. Rest in peace. And then to have a really exciting Batman Azrael Batman fight right out the gate in the very first scene. You have to contrive that with some kind of a hallucination because they've already fought recently and Bruce Wayne beat Azrael and now he's out on the streets. So, you're not going to be able to do some kind of in medias res thing where they fight again unless you want to come up with some sort of situation where that happens in the future and then show that to us and then jump back in the past. I guess I'm sort of appreciating this more. I mean, these are both gimmicks. These are both tropes that I think it's nice if we can kind of, get around to be a little bit more sophisticated in our writing, even in comics, to not have to rely on the tired dream sequence or the tired forced nonlinear storytelling thing. But I mean, it's fun. It looks great. It's very amusing. But basically, we find out what has actually happened is that Jean-Paul Valley is a little bit out of his mind right now and doesn't really know who he is. We've got an amnesia plot again. Yay. It's like, everybody say it with me, Spawn. And we've gone full circle. He's, like I said earlier, he's right back to the look and the attitude and the confusion that he had in sort of Azrael before he becomes Azrael Batman. And we find him in this alleyway having just beaten up this street punk guy who apparently attacked him for shoes. So that's the reason that Demon Batman is like, I want your shoes. And Azrael goes into his programming, and that takes over, and he just systematically beats this guy to within an inch of his life, as this homeless guy who used to be a doctor, who is very intelligent and speaks in kind of a highfalutin sort of manner, he explains to Jean-Paul Valley what he's just done to this guy, and he says, he's lucky to be alive, but you clearly also were holding back when you were beating him up. So it was self-defense, but he kind of becomes Azrael in his mind, especially in order to beat this guy. And so very, very early, you have the clear battle between his conditioning and his humanity that you had back in sort of Azrael. And he's trying to even subconsciously find the balance between those things and use what he's uh, his training in his everyday life, but not let it completely control him. But that's what he's doing at a subconscious level. The problem is he doesn't even fully understand who Azrael is, why he sort of remembers himself as Batman, and so in the hallucination that we see, we're seeing Jean-Paul with conflicting memories that are also superimposed on top of a thing that is actually happening to him. And so that's where he's at right now. As you see, he is at a real low point. He's got a lot of stubble on his face, which is the universal sign for not in a good mental headspace. And again, he's got his glasses back. He's got his long blonde hair. He looks a lot like he did when we first met him, but he is older and he is certainly a lot more well built. He's thicker. He's more muscular because he was just Batman. And so he is kind of wandering around trying to figure out what he's going to do with himself. Meanwhile, we cut to the Order of Saint Dumas, which I guess has at some point put itself back together, and it's not just the weird, creepy bad guy from Sword of Azrael, and they're trying to decide who the next Azrael is going to be, and maybe the real one is still out there and hasn't actually died. They don't know yet, but we kind of just put a pin in this. Eventually, these guys are going to come back in and probably try to recruit Azrael back into their cause. You've got to have the whole cult situation and actually play around with and develop the mythology a little bit of Azrael. And by the way, I've never read this issue or any of the rest of the series. And while, like I said, I think it reads a little bit obligatory in the first place, knowing it runs as long as it does, I have to assume that it gets kind of interesting, and I'd like to know a little bit more about this mythology and see just how crazy and potentially convoluted maybe it gets. But maybe not. Maybe it's great. Anyway, so the street punk decides that that Jean-Paul has wronged him, even though he's the one who came up to him and threatened him for shoes and said, "I'm going to knife you." There's kind of this amusing exchange at the beginning of this that also kind of reads a little bit like something out of a Spawn comic. And so these faces are a little bit McFarlane / Capullo-esque, actually, also. I'm not just saying that because it takes place in an alleyway. Like, it does feel like this is kind of the way we draw this kind of stuff in the early 90s, but it does remind me a lot of that. There's this amusing exchange at the beginning where this guy's talking to his buddies on the street, and he's like, yeah, I told him I was going to cut out his heart, and he, ruined my eye. He cut my eye. And his friend is like, oh, just because you said you were going to cut him? Like, that's cold, man. That's not fair. We need to all go after this guy. And they have a very bizarre sense of justice, and they don't seem to understand, things they bring onto themselves, of course. And so they're going to make the mistake of going back and attacking Jean-Paul Valley, who's going to just full-on become Azrael now, and it's not just in his head. It's a transformation that also feels kind of like Al Simmons to Spawn. And, again, I'm not doing this on purpose. I'm not picking books because they're like Spawn. I've never even read this, but I mean, I guess you can make some comparisons just with the costume, but like more to Redeemer and Anti-Spawn than to Spawn himself. But Jean-Paul Valley has befriended this former doctor who might be, kind of his sidekick moving on, and maybe will act as his conscience a little bit, is kind of the sense I get of it. One thing that's kind of typical and irritating about him is it seems like because he's an intellectual, he has to know everything about everything. Like, he's a doctor. That doesn't necessarily mean that he would know everything there is to know about history and theology and stuff, and perhaps he would, be interested in that stuff, but there's no discussion about how, and this would be convenient, certainly, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Right away, he knows what Azrael is, not in this universe, but in mythology, and he's like, and I get this must be made up. I don't think Azrael is a real world thing, but he's like, oh, that's in like Jewish mythology and some other mythology. I'm like, how do you know that? There's no discussion about, oh, I have this hobby, or I learned about it in a college class or something. He's an intellectual, so he knows everything. A little plot devicey. It's also odd that toward the beginning, when Jean-Paul tells him, I was Azrael, and I also think that I was Batman, he goes, this former doctor goes, oh, now you've lost me. He's like, the Azrael thing, I can get my mind around. At least you thinking that you were that. But Batman, like, that's an urban legend. Like, you might as well ask me to believe in the Easter Bunny or something. And I'm like, really? We're playing that whole thing? I like, pardon me, I like keeping Batman as much as an urban legend as possible, but you can only take it so far. The man drives a physical car that's very loud, that people are going to be able to see on the street. At the very, very least. Plus, the world revolves around him. All of the police have had interactions with him at some point. You're very, very naive to live on the street, no less, in Gotham, and not at least, like, know somebody who has had dealings with Batman or been saved by Batman or beaten up by Batman. Like, is everybody crazy in your mind? Is it a mass hallucination? I get, like, Batman being very mysterious and not being sure if rumors about him being supernatural are true or that sort of thing, but the idea that it's this super far-fetched idea that's like Santa Claus is really silly to me. Meanwhile, Batman, at exactly the same time as Jean-Paul Valley is becoming Azrael again, just happens to be thinking about Azrael and decides that he should go and help him because it's his fault that he's, out on the street, and and everything that happened with the two of them at the end of Nightfall, Batman kind of blames himself for because he made Jean-Paul Batman in the first place, which, yes, Batman was a bad move, and I'm not crying foul on the writing because Batman was at his absolute lowest point at that time, and he wasn't thinking straight. He was making a lot of mistakes. But that is a thing that he's going to have to, deal with consequences for and make up for to some degree. And so at the end of this, these punks are going after now not Azrael but Jean-Paul Valley. They figured out who he is, and they've decided to go try to set him on fire. And Jean-Paul decides to take the former doctor's advice from earlier, who says, this is kind of a payoff for this, when you see something that shouldn't be there, just ignore it. And he has given up. We have, again, kind of like Al Simmons, we have a protagonist here that is completely not proactive and has decided to just sit there and commit suicide by letting people try to murder him, which is an interesting place to begin your series. Like, and I kind of like this. It's a surprising cliffhanger and makes you want to see what happens afterwards, of course, where he's sitting on a bed, and it's the first issue of what will become a 100-issue plus, series, and he's just sitting there ready to die at the end of this. So obviously you don't want him to, mope around forever, and not take matters into his own hands and be his own person, but to start at this place where he's at this low of a point while Batman is out looking for him is a recipe for potential excitement. And then at the bottom it says, in times to come, Azrael engages in battle. Okay, so spoiler alert, he's not going to die right here before his series starts. Brian loses a battle. Oh, okay. That's our doctor guy, I think. And there's a big hole in the ground. Ooh, it's kind of odd. Foreshadowing that stuff, or I shouldn't even say foreshadowing, just telling us that these things are going to happen, trying to entice us to keep reading. Like as he's sitting in a fiery room, like yeah, I do want to keep looking at that. So yeah, I found this first issue to be kind of a mixed bag. Like I said, it reads a little bit obligatory, but there's certainly some interesting situations brewing with it. And I think it's a few more pages than it needs to be. It's oversized by a few pages. I think it could have been condensed down into the standard 22 probably. But I don't know. Maybe part of the reason I'm mixed on it is because it just feels real early Spawn. And going all the way back to what Azrael's like in Sort of Azrael feels like, I don't know, it feels a little easy. Like, I would assume he's not going to be like this for too long, because it kind of seems almost like a forced full circle, but it certainly could win me over on it. I probably will eventually try to read more of this. But anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and I will be back again tomorrow with another one. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.